Hey everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Whitney Blankenship. I'm the Content Marketing Manager at Divvit. I'm here today with David Linnell, our CEO, co-founder, data expert, DL of the above. And today we're going to talk to you about how to use order attribution to maximize your ROI on your marketing spend. And so we're really excited to have you all here with us today. So we're going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to present, we're going to answer a couple of questions in a 10-minute Q&A. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can save time using advanced AI and attribution, how you can save money with attribution for multi-channel e-commerce, because there's a scary amount of marketers who are still using last-click attribution when there are huge flaws. Using a single touch attribution model for multi-channel customers makes no sense, especially when using a multi-touch attribution model can save you 30%, even more on your ROI, get you 30% more of an ROI, I need to say. If you can't stay throughout the entire webinar, it's not a problem. We'll send you the webinar at the end by email. And also, as a special bonus, attendees today get a free machine learning attribution report customized for their e-commerce shops, and we're really excited to do that for you guys today. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. If you have questions, pop it in the question box. Ask away. Feel free. If you want to go into the chat and say hi, feel free as well. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and yeah. Now I'm going to introduce David, who is going to tell us a little bit more about Divvit, what we do and what we're about. And hey, David.
Hey, Whitney, thanks. And thanks for joining everyone. So as Whitney said, I'm one of the co-founders of Divvit, and just want to give you a quick background on what we do, why we do it, and why we want to speak about attribution. So we started Divvit with the sole purpose to help e-commerce merchants evaluate their marketing in a good and efficient way. And we do that by collecting all of the data in one place. So visitor and order data together with data from the different marketing channels. So Google, Facebook, Bing, and so on. And today we have over 500 users in 50 different countries. And we can see that attribution is becoming a more and more topic that's a topic that's spoken more and more about. And still, as Whitney said, most merchants are only using last click. So that's why we want to share our view on attribution and how it can be approached, and how we also work with machine learning to optimize the order attribution. So that's just a short background to why we are doing that. And then let's dive right into the topic. So back to you, Whitney.
Thanks so much, David. So before we jump into these models and how they work, what is attribution exactly? Attribution is this idea that you give credit to a channel for a sale on your site. For example, if a customer comes in from Bing and they bought something from your e-commerce, Bing would get the credit for the sale in a roundabout, really simplified way. This helps you understand which channels are contributing the most to your revenue. And it also helps you understand where you need to shift your budget when it comes to optimizing your ROI. And we're going to go into a few attribution models to help you understand how this works. I assume you guys are all experts on attribution already, and you just want to get to the machine learning. So we're going to cover it super quickly. But just in case you're not, we'll go through it anyway. So first, I want to go into why attribution matters. It would be so nice if somebody just came to your store and purchased on the first visit, coming from one channel, one touch point, boom, sold, done. But that's a fantasy. That never happens, or at least very, very rarely happens. In actuality, according to our stats at Divvit, our merchants need 5.5 touch points with their customers before the customer trusts enough to purchase with them. They can and will come from a multitude of channels, and then understanding this attribution aspect will help you understand your customer journey. For example, the GIF that I've got in front of you right now shows 6 different touch points, 3 of which coming from Google AdWords, then Facebook organic, and then Google organic, with a little bit of direct in between. So the idea is that we're going to be focusing on this particular sale when we look at all of our different attribution models, just so that we've got the same basis of comparison. But you can see that there's a lot of different attributes to each visit that we're going to be looking at. So let's just go ahead and dive into these attribution models. The first thing that I want to mention is that we have two attribution models in particular, first and last click, which are known as single touch attribution models, which means that they will attribute the entire credit for the sale to just one channel. Whereas linear, position-based, and time decay are all based on a multi-touch attribution model, meaning that we're going to disperse this credit across several channels. So let's start with the most popular model to date. And the reason it's so popular is likely because it's just so easy and it's kind of a default attribution model. This is last click attribution, meaning that the last touch point before the sale gets 100% of the credit and no other channel is even considered. So we can see here in the customer journey, despite AdWords having a significant impact on this sale, organic Google gets all the credit because it was the last click. However, when we're really thinking critically about this data, we can see that AdWords drove the sale from a Google search, obviously. Direct came in when the name of the site was probably saved into the browser. And then the user searched for the site in Google after probably already deciding to purchase. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to attribute 100% of the credit to just the last channel. And this is where the pros and cons of last click come in. The pros is that it's just crazy easy to use. And again, like I said before, it's kind of the default attribution model that a lot of people go to when they think we should be doing attribution, but we don't really know where to start. But the problem with last click and with any single touch attribution model is that it disregards every other touch point that exists throughout the customer journey. It doesn't show the whole story, and it, above all, does not factor in the value of the visit. We're going to talk a lot about the value of visits as we go, but just keep this in mind. First click attribution is the exact same story, but flipped over. So first click attribution, instead of attributing everything to the last touch point, we're going to attribute everything to the leading touch point. So the channel that offered you the original lead. And so in this case, we can see that AdWords gets all of the credit, which may seem a little bit more true considering that AdWords had, at least half of the touch points. We're still disregarding direct, Facebook, and organic Google. So we're not taking into account any of the other channels that contributed to this sale. Again, the pros and cons are the exact same because it's the exact same thing as last click. And the point is we're not really getting the value of the visit. So what does this look like in a practical sense? If you take a look at this this purchase, for example, if we consider we've got 9 touch points. We've got 6 of which that are coming from Google retargeting campaigns. And then the last 3, which are coming from Xanox, which is an affiliate marketing campaign. So if, for example, we counted this with last click, Xanox would take the full credit of the scale. However, looking at the customer journey, we see that this just isn't true. Google retargeting has 6 of the 9 touch points here. If we use first click, it completely disregards Xanox involvement totally. And we need something that's going to account for everything that's in between. When we apply this to several orders as opposed to just one order, you can see the difference in between why last click and first click may not be the best way to go about doing things. For example, we can see that Google and Xanox are quite present whether we use first or last click. But if we consider only one of these models, we don't get the full picture, and perhaps we over-attribute to these 2 channels. We need something that's going to be a bit more in the middle and is going to count for the assist. It's kind of like football, or if you happen to be American, soccer. If you have somebody that makes the goal, they kick the goal, they're going to get a lot of credit for kicking that goal, but they never would have had the ball if they didn't have it passed to them by their teammate. You need to think of these assists as the teammates because every touch point matters. Every touch point contributes to that customer trust and to that sale. So now we're going to stop focusing on single touch attribution, and we're really going to look at more of the multi-touch attribution models, which tend to give you a better idea about your customer journey, although there are flaws with these too. And we're going to start with linear attribution, which is interesting because it divides credit equally between all of the channels. So in this case, we see AdWords getting about 50% of the total credit, which seems to make more sense than the other attribution models we've seen. But again, this is position-based. We're not actually taking into account whether or not there's value in any of these visits. How do we know if any of these visits weren't a bounced visit? That's not very valuable at all. What pages did this customer visit when they came from this channel? So again, although the big pro here is that at least we're attributing to all the channels, but the biggest con is that we're just not taking into importance the value of each visit. And so just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like practically, just moving from single touch to multi-touch attribution, you can see here Xanox, and I've chosen this specifically because this is affiliate. So based on the amount of revenue that an affiliate is earning you, this is how much you have to pay that affiliate. And you can see in last click, we've got about 183,000 pounds versus in linear, which we have as weighted in the Divvit app, which is giving us 156,000 pounds. We've got a 30,000 pound difference between last click and weighted. And this is just in linear, I should say. And this is just simply from taking into account each of the different channels that are involved in the sale. And let's say you pay 10% of your revenue to your affiliate. And if you do affiliate marketing, you know that this is probably quite a bit more depending on what service you use and how you have your contract set up. But just 10% is about 3,000 pounds. So this is a huge impact on how much you could be spending for your affiliates and how much you could be earning as well. So that was a really simple example. Let's take a look at a different one, because linear isn't always going to diminish the impact that a channel has. For example, if we take a look at AdWords in this case, AdWords gets 507 orders via last click, but gets 540 when you distribute evenly throughout all of the channels. So we can see that AdWords actually has a significant impact in terms of assisting other sales. And so we can attribute more revenue to that sale. And we can see the same thing with Bing, except not quite as significantly. So now we're going to move to position-based attribution, which shows the first and the last channels get the most attribution, and then the rest of the attribution is dispersed among the assisting channels in the middle, which looks a little bit like this. We split 80% of the entire credit for the sale between AdWords and organic Google, and then we disperse everything else in between. In this case, we've got AdWords, which is still getting about 50% of the sale, but then we're also devaluing the impact that direct and Facebook had overall in contributing to the sale, which is one of the biggest flaws of this sort of attribution model as well, because we're still not factoring in the value of the visit. How we don't know if this person visited the checkout, did they add things to the cart, were they on the product page, how important was each visit? So I think it's interesting because it attributes quite a bit to lead and last, but the assisted channels are still undervalued. And so now we have a bit of a more complex model, which is called the time decay attribution model. And what this does is it attributes more credit for the sale towards the end of the customer journey. For example, Google was the last one to the last click, the last one to get the sale. So it has half of the total credit. And then as the touch points get further from the point of sale, they diminish in terms of getting credit for it. So this is interesting because here, unlike the other models, which give AdWords quite a bit of attribution, it only gets about 17%. Organic Google obviously takes home the most, and then you've got Facebook, which takes home a disproportionate amount as well. So again, the biggest con here is that this is complex, that there's a certain complexity to the time decay model. But again, this is position-based, so we're not factoring in the value of these visits. And this really devalues the lead and the assisted visits that are further from sale. It's entirely possible that your customer came to your store, added a ton of things to the cart, bounced 5 times in between, and then came to complete the purchase from a different channel. So this would definitely devalue that first visit, which was actually quite important for the decision-making process. And this is kind of where we're trying to hit home. So the question is, I guess at this point, what do you do when all common attribution models seem flawed? You don't have to live with flawed attribution, actually, because there's another option. You can use machine learning attribution, which functions as an algorithm that provides true attribution. However, I am not at all an expert on this algorithm, so I'm going to welcome David Linnell back to the scene to explain a little bit more about how this works and how to implement it. Hey, David.
Hey, thanks, Whitney. Thanks for that, going through all of those models that exist. So, but let's take a step back again and see what is it really that we want to achieve with attribution. And it is to find the real value that each visit has before an order. So the actual effect that that visit had on the order. And the way that we think that can be done is to see how much does each session affect the purchase decision. So when I come to the site, how much more likely is it that I will make a purchase after that visit than before? And as we've seen in all of these models, they only take into account, so where am I sort of positioned in the visit chain? So is it last or first or somewhere in the middle? But as Whitney has mentioned, there are a lot more parameters to take into account. So if I come to the site and leave straight away versus if I look at a lot of pages, I spend a lot of time on the site, maybe I actually even add something to the cart and make a visit to the checkout. It's probable to believe that that visit with all of those page views and all of the interaction on the site has a bigger effect on my purchase decision than the one where we bounced. So that is really the parameters that we also want to take into account, besides where does the visit happen within the visit chain. So if we take a look again at this order that Whitney showed before, we have the 9 visits before the order, 6 of them coming from Google retargeting and 3 of them coming from Sanox. But as we can see, there are also a lot of different characteristics to each visit. Some of them 14 page views and 7 minutes and so on. So it's a lot of different behaviors that is being, the user does a lot of different behaviors in each visit. All of these have quite a lot of visits and quite a lot of time on the site, but we can see that on the 3rd visit, for instance, that's actually a bounced visit. So only looking at one page and then disappearing. So again, if we only take into account first or last here, we don't really put any value to the actual interaction with the site and the engagement that creates with the visitor. So the way that we approach this is with a machine learning model. And the reason that we do that is that we want to take into account not only the position, but also the behavior on the site. And we do that based on the conversion likelihood. So if we take this example again, where we have the 6 visits, first AdWords and then ending with Google. So the way that this works, an algorithm like this, ours or someone else's, is that you look at each visit, and then after that visit, it gets a score. And that score is based on how likely is it that this visitor will come back and make a purchase. So after the first visit, it has a score or a percentage likelihood. After the second visit, it gets another score. And that is then affected of how long has it been since we saw this visitor before, how many page views did he look at, and so on. And all the way for each visit until the order is actually placed. And once the order is then placed, we take these different scores of the visits and attribute according to those. So that means that we can't really say the exact model for each order because it depends on the value that the visit had. So if we look at this example, it could be that first visit gets 80%, and then it's actually the direct visit that gets 40%, and then it ends with 10% to Google. And the way this works is that the algorithm in itself is trained on all of our data sets. So we have trained it on about 500 million events, but it also becomes better and better trained on each e-commerce merchant's data. So it's self-training, and it learns from the behavior from each individual merchant's visitors. So let's have a look at the impact here. So Whitney showed you before the impact going from a single touch to a multi-touch can have on your decisions in the end, so the data you base your decisions on. And the same way here, we can see we have revenue last click, we have revenue weighted or linear, and we have then revenue weighted Divvit. So that's the machine learning algorithm. And looking at organic here, we have a last click revenue of just shy of 2.2 million. If we look at the linear model, that is significantly higher, meaning that there's more assisting visit here than actually last visits. But then looking at the algorithm model, that has an even higher value, meaning that the visits that were before the last visit actually had a higher value than if you would just distribute it evenly among all of the visits. But then on the other hand, looking at the row below, we can see for direct, it's the opposite case. There we have the highest value for last click, meaning that a lot of last click or last visits are made direct, which makes a little bit of sense because you have to find the site often somehow before you can come to it directly. So if we distribute it according to a linear model, the revenue is lower, but then again, the machine learning model shows it has an even lower value. So in a lot of these cases, the purchase decision has already been made, and we've had the most effect of the visitor before the last visit, but then they come back directly and make a purchase. And we have a third case here just to show that it's not always that the machine learning model shows a higher or a lower value. It could also be that it's somewhere in between. So in this case, we have a high value for last click for affiliate, and we have a low value for the linear model, and then the machine learning model shows a value somewhere in between. So the thing here is, and actually something if we look at the pros and cons, is that we will get a unique value for each channel and for each order. And the pros of that are, of course, that we attribute to all channels. We show the true attribution or the true value based on the actual visit of that value of that visit. Sorry. It takes into account more parameters than just where did this visit happen, so pages viewed and time spent on site and so on. And it actually gives you a very easy number to use in the end. So it will show you how many orders did this channel contribute with and how much of the revenue. But the cons can be that it's a bit more complex and it's a bit more difficult to understand. So a last click model or a first click model is very easy. You can see that, okay, this is where we attribute the revenue. But the machine learning, it will put a unique value on each visit. So you can't say before that it will put this much to the last or this much to the first, which makes it a bit more complex and difficult to understand. But once you have it in place and once you understand it, then the actual output or the value of it is as easy to use as the value coming out from a last click or a first click model. And yeah, that's all about the different attribution models and our approach to it. So let's see if we have any questions, Whitney.
Sure, David. So thanks for explaining all about machine learning attribution. I think that was really insightful and clear. Let's see if we have any questions coming in from people. If you haven't asked a question yet, feel free to pop it in the little box there. Looks like we have one from John. It looks like he's from Spain, I think. For the last machine learning model, how do you know that this is truer than other models?
First of all, I mean, all the other models all are simplifications. So it's one model applied to all orders. So is it the first visit that gets the revenue or the last visit? So just from that, we can see that that's a bit simplified. But then also it is that the actual answer comes from the data. So we analyze each visit and how big of an effect it actually has on the decision. And that effect is what decides on the attribution. So by using the data in detail to attribute the revenue, we come much closer to the real value or the true value of that channel.
Excellent. It looks like he's actually got a follow-up question for us. Will the machine learning model need to be tweaked all the time?
Yes and no. As I said, it's self-learning, which means that it uses all the new data coming in all the time. So it tweaks itself sort of. So it starts out with a model based on trained on all of our data, and then as more and more data come in, it adapts. So it will also be changing over time, which is also one of the reasons you can't say that this is the exact value that it would put on a visit. So yes, it needs to be tweaked, but it does it itself. So no need for manual input there.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for your question. And if I've got a question for you, David, actually. If last click attribution is so flawed, if it really just doesn't work out at all, why are so many marketers still using this?
I think it's what you said. It's simple, and also in many cases, maybe you can't even see further back than the last visit. So most of the time, we always know where did this last visit come from, and then it's very easy to use that as the channel that brought it in. So simplicity, and also since the early days of online sales and e-commerce, maybe where it was even more common that you could only see the last visit, it has become sort of a standard. But since then, we have learned that it's not only important to get that converting visit, but it's also important to, of course, get the visitor to your site the first time and so on. So that's why I think the topic is being discussed a lot now. What is actually the right model?
Awesome, thanks. And it looks like we've got one last question coming in from the US. Oh, wow, you're up early. How long does it take for a machine learning model to gather data, enough data to provide insights?
Yes, so I mean, it will work from the beginning. It's trained on like some data before, but it also tweaks itself, as I said. So I mean, it depends on how much data you have coming in, but I would say, yeah, 30 days as something as a benchmark. After that, you should have quite accurate numbers to compare with.
Okay. And last question is, how can I implement this attribution model for my store?
Yes, so we're gonna have an offer actually here for everyone that joined here. So we can calculate this with the Divvit tracking, of course, and everyone who wants to will also be able to get their own attribution report after the first 30 days trial. I think there actually popped in a couple of more questions with me.
Oh, let's see. Okay, so we've got one from Mikola. I'm sorry if I butchered that. I'm checking my orders, but some of them are saying unknown, while I can see UTM medium equals email. When does it come as a source email in Divvit?
Okay, yeah, that's a very Divvit specific question. I think maybe it's easier if you write there in the chat, Nikolai. But the short answer is that you can teach Divvit to recognize that as an email, and I will make sure someone gets in touch with you and help you out with that.
Okay, and it looks like I've got another one from Constantin. Looking at the examples you've shown, the machine learning algorithm differed from the linear model by about 1 to 2%, which sounds like something that can be offset by a discrepancy caused by incorrectly working tracking. Did you see bigger differences between these methods and other examples?
Yes, we have. So we actually have done a check of all marketing channels for all of our merchants, and we see from like the machine learning model showing 10% of the value of last click or linear to 6 times more. So there can be very big differences. In most cases, it's somewhere in between, maybe 0 to 10% difference, but there are also some cases where there's really big impact.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your question, Constantin. I've got another one from a mysterious PN. So how long does the system need to learn before it provides accurate information relevant to a particular business? I think we talked a little bit about this before. We were talking about how it's automatically trained based on the data that we have, based on our 500 million events. Is that right, David?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's the same question actually, or similar question. So 30 days as a benchmark, but it will still giving insights from the start.
Okay. And we've got another one from Alan, who says, if one touch point appears multiple times, like AdWords in this example you've given, does this affect the algorithm and give more weight to a certain source?
Yes, it does. So each visit is treated independently. So each visit gets a score, and then the channel will get sort of the combined score from all of those visits. So if you have more more visits and they affect the purchase decision, then more would be attributed towards that channel, sort of as a bundling of those scores.
Fantastic. Great questions, guys. I'm super excited about these. And don't worry, Mikola, I'm going to send somebody to get that answered for you as well. We'll email you right after the webinar. So now I just want to go into this gift that we've got for you guys for attending. As David sort of mentioned earlier, we're going to be offering everybody a machine learning attribution report, and it's going to be customized for your e-commerce store. But in order to do this, we need to get you signed up with Divvit if you're not already, and we need to get about 30 days worth of data as the benchmark that we've talked about a little bit before. So you're going to get a true attribution report customized around your entire store, your customers, and the way they behave on your store. You'll be able to see the real value for the channels that you use, because we're going to compare this with last click and linear, so you can see exactly which of these attribution models is working. And then you're also going to be able to get the insights on the best channels for your store and how to obviously boost your return on investment. And on that note, a huge thank you to David for being our fantastic data expert today and going into all of the hard questions I didn't know how to answer. And thank you everybody for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you all. It was a pleasure to answer your questions. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to email me at whitney@divvit.com or our data expert himself, david@divvit.com. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day, guys. Bye.